Good evening. I would like to talk to you about Bigfoot and high strangeness. This is continuing our videos series on this subject where we look at some of the possible explanations for Bigfoot and the woo as it's so called. Some of the more odd things that have been reported like orbs of light, flashes of light, Bigfoot coming through a portal, red eyes, hovering, flight, moving at incredible speeds, being able to cloak, mind speak, being able to induce fear and terror in people or an immense feeling of calm that doesn't quite fit the situation, or people say that Bigfoot was communicating with them some other way, cloaking, like I said. So let's take a look. Like I said, one of the odd things I find is when people refer to Bigfoot spoke to me. Now, it's one thing to infer, like give you a bad look and infer doom, but to actually feel like it's giving you thought, that's something I can't particularly explain. And other things such as being able to cloak, or it disappeared through a portal, or it stepped through and all of a sudden it was transparent or semi-transparent, or it just appeared. Also, the ability for them to hover or fly, or it flew across the field. It begs a question, are there any scientific explanations for this? Well, not everything can be explained scientifically, but I feel there are some things I've heard over the years, and I'd like to pass that on to you. This isn't necessarily what I believe. I come out with videos and give you guys a theory for you to think about, and people think that that's what I necessarily believe. That's not true. This is just some of the scientific explanations. Some of them make sense to me and some of them don't. So let's have a look. One of the most striking and obvious examples, especially for newer people, is when Bigfoot is reported to fly or float, or it hovered across the field. You have to remember that these things are masters of their environment. They know where to step. There are reports of these things in a full run and not making a sound. And you spend your whole life, you ever been out with a really good hunter or a really good woodsman, they can walk amazingly quiet even through leaf litter and everything else. And one of the other things you got to remember about Bigfoot is there are lots of reports of them running cheetah speed, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. People are driving a truck down a highway, 50, 60 miles an hour, and there's one keeping up with them. Incredible, insane, unbelievable speeds. But there's a lot of reports for this. Cops, firefighters, paramedics looking over going, wow, whatever this 8-foot tall creature is, it's running fast. So you got to think about also is they're incredibly smooth, incredibly fast. So that would be unworldly, unnatural. If you could look at them and they're looking behind a tree and you look away for a second and now they're behind another tree, they could look like they're teleporting or moving. But no, they just have the ability to move that fast. These are basically the supermen out there. So I think a lot of the supernatural stuff about them disappearing and reappearing, or just them being the masters of their environment, being incredibly fast, and also how smooth they are. When people walk and then you run, you kind of have a clip-clop gait and your head bounces up and down. These things, I think, because of their mass, they kind of have to have one foot on the ground and have to have a springier legs and knees. They're proportioned different from us, and that's one of the things that you get from a lot of Bigfoot reports that have nothing to do with anything out of the ordinary as far as woo or strangeness type stuff. It's just how smooth they are. So I think a lot of the interpretation of it flew across the yard. Well, if its legs are, grass comes up to its knees, it's going to look like it's flying. I mean, you see Patty, she's pretty smooth. She's loping along there, and I hear the faster these things move, the smoother they get. And if you look at the arm proportions and the leg proportions, they're not built like us. They don't bob up and down like us. And from all the reports of them running really fast and keeping up with cars, it's absolutely fascinating, and I think this could explain some of the more odd about how it disappeared and reappeared, how it was moving really quickly, how it looked like it was flying. As far as the full-on hovering in the air, I can't explain that. Perhaps they can hang on to branches or jump high, or some of them are just really tall. If it's partially obstructed and you see this head 12 feet in the air, you're just going to think, wow, it's hovering there, but maybe it's really just that tall. So those are some of the explanations I can think for some of the way that they move and the floating and the flying and disappearing and reappearing. Now, trying to explain some of the more odd things that Bigfoot's been reported to do, like the cloaking and blending in, or it was standing over here and it was brown and then it ran over there and it was green. Some of this can be explained, I think, scientifically from a couple different reasons. One of the most obvious ones I'm going to get into is Sasquatch hair, which you see in the middle. Doesn't have that. I think it's called a medulla. I'm not a hair expert. Maybe I'll do a video on it later and really research it. But the one on the left is a human hair, and you can see that line in the middle. And you can see that Sasquatch doesn't have that, and regular animal hair has a real thick colorization. Now, it's kind of like when you're a kid or you see a blonde person outside, and in the sunlight, you're like, wow, they look really blonde. When they're inside, they're like, wow, they look like they have brown hair. And even under certain lighting conditions, like, wow, their hair has a reddish tinge to it. It's kind of that same idea. Without that pigment in the center of the root hair growing that humans have and animals have, they can really transfer a lot of light through and blend a lot better. So I think that's kind of one of the things why, if it's running through the woods really fast, because we already covered these things run incredibly fast, and they're kind of doing this where their hair is kind of helping them blend in the surrounding lighting features and everything else. I think that could possibly be some of the reasons why I say, wow, it was cloaked, or it was hard to see, or it moved. I think that might be one of the more plausible explanations for it. So when we get into Bigfoot, we're going to talk about infrasound. This is one of those things that people report. They report being what they call zapped or drained, where they feel a feeling of dread or suddenly tired or very hot or very cold, or this feeling of I need to get out of there, this rumbling feeling. It's a real thing. Infrasound is very much a real thing, and it's been studied to have human effects on human bodies and human brains, and even our eyeballs and how they oscillate, because you got to remember, everything quantumly has a frequency. A rock sitting still has a frequency. So you got to remember that different vibrational waves can interfere. So what infrasound is ultra low frequencies, and then there's audible. You can't hear it, but it's still there. And then there's audible frequencies in the middle, which you can hear, and then there's ultrasound, which is above what you can hear, but is super, super, super fast. To give you an example of animals and how this is used, elephants can produce infrasound, this real low vibration. Alligators, crocodiles, tigers, they can use it to stun prey, to ward or predators, to ward people off. It's just kind of one of those things where for having such a large animal and large vocal cords, they can produce this. And I think through evolution, they've been able to enhance this. Going all the way up to ultrasound, which is what bats use, is kind of like a sonar, which means they can not only can they produce it, but they can hear it, and hear it so well that they can use it like a sonar, which is pretty fascinating. How this pertains to humans, and in my level of experience coming from the engineering world, which I've been in for many years, when you're talking about large central plants, boilers, air conditioners, chillers, fans, pumps, all the stuff that's associated with everything to keeping a large building or site hot and cold, all these equipment produce frequencies. They produce vibrations, they produce sound, some of it you can hear. And being in a building, being big equipment, they can vibrate that building, and it can get transferred through the metal and drywall and structure of that building, and it can have a profound effect. I know, like, say you have a big, like a 10-story building, and you got a bunch of air handling equipment on the roof. The majority, or just about all of it, is on the roof, and right below, if you could draw a straight line 10 feet below, there's people in office buildings. Well, if these vibrational frequencies aren't right, they can cause headaches, which I've seen before, having like a fan coil in a lab or something like that. It just slowly drones and gives everybody headaches, or makes everybody feel tired. Or the opposite, it can go the other way. Infrasound can make people jittery. One of the more common things that when Bigfoot is reported when they get zapped is not only a feeling of dread, but they feel overheated. It'll be a 35-degree day and people want to peel their clothes off. They're feeling really warm. Or the other thing is people feel really cold. It'll be a warm day and they suddenly feel cold. They get like that, I had a cold spot in the room, or I had a chill run down my spine, even though it was 90 degrees out. Well, infrasound can have this effect. And one of the other things infrasound can have an effect on is the physiology of your eye, your brain, how your brain interprets those images. Your eye has a frequency, and if you can disrupt that frequency, your vision can blur, things can be blotched out, your eyes can cross, and you can see double. This is all scientific fact. Now, I think you could argue if Bigfoot actually has infrasound, but the fact that infrasound has an effect on humans and other animals and other creatures is pretty well proven. As far as them cloaking, you could make the argument that they affected the eyesight and we physically couldn't see them because our eyes were being blurred. Like they're there, they're physically there, but our eyes were getting messed up by the infrasound. But one of the other things that Bigfoot been reported that possibly can do with this infrasound is that they could actually use it to bend light. Now they could produce this frequency at the right frequency to kind of cloak or bend the light or transfer the light around them. I think it's a little more plausible that they could use infrasound to mess up your eye frequency and how you see, and maybe your interpretation of that, probably more than they could actually bend light around them. But it is technically possible to have a vibrational wave actually deflect light. This is also some of the explanation of why they really hard to get on trail cameras, or when people have a camera and, hey, I saw Bigfoot when I had a full battery and I pulled it out and the battery was completely drained. Well, the right frequencies can have profound effects on batteries and electronic equipment and any kind of equipment out there. So I think these are kind of some of the more things that infrasound and waves can have that are a little bit more of a scientific for you guys. As far as the glowing red eyes, I think a lot of this can be explained through humans have very poor eyesight at night. So when we have to go out at dark, we have to have some kind of a, either be ambient moonlight or a porch light or a flashlight. We have to have some kind of artificial light source. All animals do, but to the extent that we need it is a lot more than a lot of other animals. So I think even if it's in the ultraviolet light or infrared light where you can't see it, but kind of like how you can have a night vision illuminator, well, it'll still bounce off. This light will still bounce off the insides of their eyes. Even if you couldn't see it, it's still there. So I think like most animals that have night vision, what it is the insides of their eyes reflect more light back and forth, so that light bounces back and forth in their lens and it helps them see better. Now, in the great ape species and gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans, they're all diurnal. We're all, you included, as a great ape species, as a human, we don't have very good night vision. We don't have a lot of reflection. But there is other large animals that have it. Lions, particularly, tigers, certain reptile species. Lots of animals have really good night vision. Like I said, very large animals do. I know bears have pretty good night vision as well. If you've ever tried taking a picture of your cat at night or in a low light and your flash goes off, they kind of have this like, I'm a possessed cat look. It's really kind of funny. It kind of creeps you out. You're like, oh, look at the cute kitty. And you're like, uh-oh, it's possessed. Look at those eyes. But what that is a very efficient eye source, which is why you stumble through the house in the middle of the night and a cat can run through it and never hit a thing, is they just use the ambient light way better than we do. So when you introduce an artificial light source, it can really reflect back and it can really glow. So I think that having extraordinarily good night vision would probably be a pretty good case for them to have some of this, eyes glowing. And since we need an artificial light source, that would be a chance for them to reflect back. Raccoons are another good example, although they don't get very big. So these are just some of the ideas that have been thrown around that I've heard over the years for some of the things that Bigfoot can do. Infrasound, being able to hear it, being able to produce it and affect the human body, and maybe even affect light. Being really fast, their hair follicles being pretty transparent. If you want to get into the vibrational frequency and waves and interdimension stuff, Ron Moorhead's book, Quantum Bigfoot, is very good. It's a pretty easy read, actually, for being a pretty high-level subject, quantum physics. It's pretty, even a dumb guy like me can read it and pretty much comprehend. The Bigfoot Outlaws, if you look back at some of their older shows, they talked a lot about infrasound and the effects it can have on the human body. One of the guys on there, I believe, was a NASA engineer, and he's quite good. Even though those guys talk like, they're from the South and good old boys, they're really smart, and you should listen to what those guys have to say. But they talk a lot about infrasound and its effect on human bodies and being zapped and how it can be a weapon, and they get into it a lot more than I did here. This is just kind of the very basic bones gist of it. So I hope you guys liked the video. These are just some of the things I've heard over the years. what's going on with Bigfoot, how they could possibly do this scientifically. Now, I don't necessarily believe that scientifically we can explain everything they do or be reported. If it's pitch black, you can't see anything, but you see two glowing eyes crossing a field and there's no light to illuminate it, I can't explain that. Like, it full on vanished in front of your eyes. I can't explain that. But there are some things that maybe we can't explain, and that's what we tried to get done here. Spent a lot of time on this video. I hope you guys enjoy it. Please like, please subscribe. We got a lot more coming up. Thank you.